Welcome back to Unjourneying. I'm Mira, licensed clinical social worker. I felt inspired to record this episode because I often ask myself, if I had to boil it down, what is the essence of my work? After all these years of meditation, of my own psychotherapy, my own psychedelic work, my training as a psychotherapist, my work with clients, and my guiding work, how can I really summarize what I do? What is the core of it? And another way to phrase that would be, if I could just shout one thing across the rooftops of the world, what would it be? What would I want every person on this planet to know? And it would be this. It would be what I'm about to share with you. And it's basically a set of skills that I would summarize as what I call my hot stove meditation. So the hot stove meditation is a meditation I guide all of my clients on. And I see it as a really helpful skill for life in general, and also a really essential preparatory meditation for psychedelic work. So what I'm going to do in this episode is explain to you in detail the inspiration, the rationale, the protocol for the hot stove meditation. We won't actually do one today because I would prefer to leave that for live work that I would do together with you. But my hope is that in explaining the setup for the meditation, that it'll still be really instructive and still help to impart, what I'm hoping to share in my work. So let me get down to it. So the hot stove meditation. So why do I call it that? So the idea of the hot stove meditation is that when you literally, as a human being, touch a hot stove, your hand jerks away instantaneously, reflexively. You don't have to think about it. It just happens, right? And this is an amazing strategy by the nervous system of avoidance. It is a place where avoidance is the solution. It is the answer. You should be avoiding burning your hand, right? Our nervous system is wired to seek pleasure, to avoid pain. It's doing its job very well in that instance. And it seems like one of the great challenges with being a human is that our nervous system seems to over-apply that avoidance strategy as a kind of blunt instrument to all sorts of other situations that don't merit it, all sorts of other situations where it's not actually the most effective approach. And the first situation that comes to mind is emotional distress. So when we feel emotional distress, when we're feeling anger or sadness or fear or shame, it feels very uncomfortable. And so reflexively, our nervous system is making that correspondence of, oh, this is just like the hot stove, so I should avoid this, right? And so many of us get trapped in these patterns of avoidance. It's not our fault, it's our conditioning. We're often inducted into that through our parents, and they were through their parents, et cetera. It's an intergenerational transmission. And so we avoid, so we don't feel our feelings. And so what do we do instead? We get out our phones and we scroll, or we eat something, or we watch some TV, or we just do anything we can to distract ourselves from it. And I don't mean to say that in judgment. These are ways that we are coping, ways that we are protecting ourselves. It's not our fault. It's just how we were trained. And it is a kind of avoidance, or you could also say protection in a more compassionate vein, that does not actually heal us. It does not actually get the need of the feeling met for it to be metabolized. And so it kind of keeps the cycle of avoidance, whatever that may be, or addiction, or distraction, or dissociation going. It keeps the wheel turning. And so that is the dynamic of the hot stove, a nervous system avoidance mechanism over-applied to, in this case, emotional distress, where it is not actually the most effective strategy. Another sort of subtype of situations where avoidance is not effective is chronic pain, right? So for many people, they may suffer from chronic pain where there is no immediate sort of solution to it. Maybe they've tried painkillers, maybe they've tried stretching, they've tried physical therapy, they've tried all sorts of things, and their chronic pain just still persists. And so the nervous system is sending all these warning signals. And once again, there is this internal kind of pull to want to avoid. And in that situation, actually, there is no imminent harm, right? So there's no reason to avoid the pain. There's actually no way to escape it. And so the strategy actually is not to avoid, but to approach. And this is the essence of what I want to impart with this first component of the hot stove meditation, is that we are shifting the energy from avoidance to approach and to curiosity, to mindful curiosity. And so basically, when I guide my clients on the hot stove meditation, it has three different parts. And the first part is that we need to actually evoke or invoke, you could say, like welcome in to the space some kind of distressing phenomena to work with. This is, I call this turning on the hot stove, so that we can notice this pull to avoid by the nervous system, and then introduce this new kind of conditioned response to stay with it, to approach the phenomena with a kind of mindful curiosity. In a sense, what we're asking our nervous system to do is to keep our hand on the hot stove, which sounds completely bonkers, right? To our nervous system, that just doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that? That is dangerous. That is deadly. We should not do this. All these warning bells are going off. And yet, what we find in mindfulness is that when you actually stay with a distressing phenomenon, and of course, I'm talking about things that aren't imminent harm, right? I'm not talking about actual danger, physical danger. I'm not talking about abusive relationships. I'm not talking about dangerous sort of situations where you actually need to escape. I'm talking about day-to-day distressing emotions and distressing pain within the body that cannot be escaped, cannot be avoided, that are just part of the flow of life. And actually what they need is for us not to avoid, but actually to keep our hand on the stove, to kind of reprogram, to refine that instrument that our nervous system has, and to add in this new tool. So it's not just about avoidance, but it's actually adding in this new sort of edge to it of, can we actually approach with mindful curiosity? And then something different happens, something different opens up. So as I said, part one of the hot stove meditation is I actually will invite my clients to bring something intentionally distressing into the space. And there are a million different ways to do this. And a lot of this, this isn't my original invention. A lot of this comes from exposure therapy, is where I get a lot of this stuff. When I used to work in the VA system in a PTSD outpatient clinic with veterans, we would have all sorts of creative ways of actually triggering, and I use that word carefully because this is all about dose, right? We're not trying to flood somebody. We're not trying to overwhelm you. I'm trying to just introduce the right dose of distress so that something stirs up within your nervous system so that you can work with it. So it's very, very important when doing this kind of work with distress, with trauma. It's all about gentleness, the right dose, the right titration. I find that's true across the board with psychedelic work as well. And so yeah, when I worked in the VA, we would have things like, have our veterans perhaps like smell, burnt rubber or put on headphones and listen to sounds of fireworks, anything that would evoke some of their battle experiences. And again, we're not trying to re-traumatize them, but actually to just get them in a space where they feel safe, they feel supported, they're in the clinical setting, and the therapist is there, and yet they are experiencing some kind of arousal within their nervous system that then they can work on mindfully to metabolize, to experience a sense of safety in processing it, and to reprogram their nervous systems from avoidance to approach and curiosity. And so I often get really creative with my clients. A lot of times they have something that's very top of mind, and they don't even need to tell me what it is. They can just say, oh yes, there's definitely something. I can just think about it right now, and something will stir up in my nervous system. And what I'm really looking for is something that affects them physically. Because really the heart and soul of the hot stove meditation is working with the body. And that's very intentional because so often when we experience distress, one of the classic go-to escape hatches is dissociation, right? So we're getting up in our thoughts, in our mind, in distractions, or just sort of narrating what's happening instead of actually feeling, instead of literally feeling our feelings. Perhaps even psychologizing, or perhaps even using very sophisticated language in a therapeutic context to talk about our feelings and describe them and storytell. All of those things can be these tools that are coping, but they are disconnecting us from actually plugging into the light socket of the direct energetic signature of the feelings themselves, right? So yeah, sometimes clients have something top of mind. Sometimes they struggle a bit with this step, and they say, "Gosh, I don't know how to." Some clients, by their own admission, they say, "I'm living from the neck up, and I don't feel my body. I don't know how to get access to that." So then I can get more creative with them, and I'll say, "Okay, well, let's talk about what is one of your worst fears." And for example, I had a client once said, "Oh my gosh, dying in a plane crash, my worst fear." And of course I check in with them. Would it be okay if we explored that? Would that feel within your learning zone? I don't overwhelm you. Yes. Okay. So, and then what I would do is I would have my client close their eyes, and then I'll start telling them a story. Okay, let's imagine you're at 30,000 feet, and then all of a sudden, you hear this explosion, and there's smoke and fire, et cetera, et cetera. So I take them through this scenario, and then it generally is very effective when I do that. Something happens in their body. They start feeling, their heart rate is increasing, or their breath rate is increasing, or they feel tingles or coldness or something like that. The point is, we turn on the stove. So we're inviting distress intentionally. Something we very rarely do as human beings, because we're always trying to avoid it, right? So even the fact that we are starting the meditation by inviting it in is telling our nervous system, okay, we're doing something different this time. We're breaking out of that cycle of avoidance. So I usually pivot very quickly with my clients into part 2, which is once they've been in the feelings for some time. That can be as little as just like 30 to 60 seconds, because I like to strike while the iron's hot. Then I start getting interactive with them, and I start asking them, so what are you feeling right now in your body? And there are, admittedly, and I explain this to them, very particular types of answers that I'm looking for, and other types of answers that I'm not looking for. And so the answers I'm looking for are things that are in the present moment, in the body, and very detailed, right? And the reason I'm getting so particular about that is because as human beings, when we're asked how we're feeling, even if I say, how are you feeling in your body, or what are you noticing in your body, so often we default to the psychologization, the storytelling of our experience, and going into past and future. So it's not uncommon for people to say things like, oh, well, usually, when I think about this sort of thing, it reminds me of my childhood. Right now, I'm not thinking about that because of yada, yada, yada. And, earlier in the day, I was feeling this way, but now I'm not, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of traveling in time, and there's a lot of abstraction. And so I try to prepare people before this meditation to say, I'm looking for a very particular genre of experience. This is a very unusual way to answer this question. How are you feeling? Or specifically, what are you feeling in your body right now? Which is how I usually phrase it. And I usually model it for them. And I'll give them an example. I'll say, okay, let's just say I'm going to think right now about something that my dad said to me the other day that was upsetting. And that's going to be my hot stove. So I'm turning that on and noticing how I'm feeling. And then if the therapist were to check in with me and say, okay, what are you noticing in your body right now? I might say something like, noticing a heaviness in my chest, about the size of my fist, right in the center. Feels like it's pressing down. Has kind of a blue color to it. And also noticing my breath is getting a little tighter. And I'm noticing some tension in my lower back. So you see what I'm doing there? I'm getting very, very specific, very detailed, very curious about what is happening in my body in terms of the actual physical, textural, sensory details. It sounds kind of technical, but the reason it's so technical in that way is because we're trying to, again, replace this mechanism of avoidance with curiosity. And with curiosity, details help, right? Details really amplify curiosity. So I like to think about when we're doing this exercise, you almost imagine that you are like a scientist with a microscope. Your attention's like this microscope, and it's like you're zooming in on these sensory phenomena and getting deeper and deeper and deeper and just trying to notice all these different aspects of it. And for those of you who are familiar with vipassana, which is a lot of the inspiration for this meditation, you will be familiar with all these different qualities of experience that we can track. So these might be things like temperature, pressure, or is it tingling? Is it prickling? Is it sharp? Does it have a color to it? Is it dense? How big is it? Where exactly is it? Is it deep within the body? Is it on the surface of the body? Et cetera, et cetera. You could go on and on and on. And there's just so much, almost unlimited amounts of detail you can notice with these sensory phenomena. And as kind of technical and scientific, objective, perhaps that might sound, there's a quality to it as well that is very much heart-centered and compassionate and very much about inner child healing that goes hand in hand with this. And let me explain what I mean by that. So when we are children, so many of us, when we have these really big emotions that are just very natural and spontaneous, a lot of times we get this kind of messaging or feedback from our parents of, I don't have time for that. That is too big. That is too much. I can't hold this. You need to fake it till you make it. You need to turn that frown upside down. These are actual phrases that clients have told me so many times that their parents literally told them, turn that frown upside down. And so what do we internalize when we're children is, oh, when I'm feeling distressing emotions, my parents can't handle that. Therefore, I can't handle it. Therefore, I should dismiss it. I should avoid it. I should push it down. I should try to get rid of it. I should try to fix it. These emotions are not welcome. They are a problem, actually. And so that's how we relate often to our emotions. And so in this simple act of sitting with the emotions, of keeping our hand on the hot stove, zooming in with our attentional faculties with mindfulness, and just noticing, gosh, if I'm feeling sad, bringing in something sad or bringing in fear, bringing in anger, I'm noticing a tingle on my face or noticing my throat is tight or I'm noticing my shoulders are heavy. All sorts of things people tell me. There's so much rich textural detail to this experience. And when we notice that, what are we doing? We are not trying to fix it. We're not trying to solve it. We're not trying to make it go away. We're not trying to say, I don't have time for this. We're actually saying, hey, come here. Let's spend some time together. And so I like to think that we are actually sending a message to our inner child that it's okay to feel what you're feeling. I describe this to my clients. I say, I really like to imagine that when we evoke these feelings, that it's almost as if your inner child is coming to you and is scared, is ashamed, is crying, is sad, is whatever the feeling is lonely. And rather than dismissing them, as your parents did, you are welcoming them in and saying, hey, come here. Let's spend some time together with this. Let me give you a hug. Let's just feel into it together. And you can see that there's something so loving and open-hearted and just deeply compassionate about that. So these two things go hand in hand. There is sort of a technical precision protocol, vipassana kind of element to this, where we're getting very, very fine-grained, and that's that scientific microscope kind of energy. And then there's this other energy that's very just loving and open-hearted and embracing. And that's that inner child healing energy. So in this one exercise, just in the simple act of noticing, of mindfulness, these two energies are interbraiding to create this beautiful healing experience. So continuing on with the arc of the meditation, so what I do with people is in part 2, when I do this interactive part, after we have, they've described to me how they're feeling, and I might ask some follow-up questions sometimes to get higher levels of detail. Then what I'll do is we'll just go into silence. I'll set a timer, usually about 5 minutes I find is sufficient. And I'll tell them, now during this 5 minutes of silence, all I want you to do is just continue to notice the sensations in your body with this compassionate, mindful curiosity. And I tell them, they can either focus on one part of their body at a time, if there are particular kind of hot spots, they can kind of do this body scan, or they can just freestyle it and just see where their attention naturally lands. But the focus needs to be on the body, right? And just noticing. So they do this for 5 minutes. And most of the time with my clients, this is all we do is we just focus on the body sensations. Sometimes I will add, just as a corollary, that if I've been working with somebody for longer and they want to do some more expansive work, we can apply the same vipassana strategy to the realm of thought, right? So if somebody is having lots and lots of thoughts, anxious thoughts, rumination, depressing thoughts, negative self-talk, etc., we can apply that same kind of mindful and compassionate curiosity to the thoughts, right? And for those of you who are familiar with acceptance and commitment therapy or doing vipassana on thoughts, this may be familiar. But you can start to notice thoughts are also sensations, right? So thoughts, you might ask, are they quiet or loud, or are they even auditory? Are they voices? Are they your voice, somebody else's voice, or are they more visual? And if they're visual, how big are they? What is the sort of resolution of them? Are they very sharp? Are they fuzzy? Are they full color? Are they black and white? All these sorts of things. And so again, you see, we shift from relating to the experience of thought as a problem or something to be solved, something to be managed, something to be wrestled with, and experience it more as a texture, almost as like a piece of music, almost as art, or as like a sensory phenomena, like just being in nature and just noticing. So we can do that same thing. Like I said, I don't always start people there because usually I feel like people are very disconnected from their bodies. So I start with the somatic. And then once that skill is very much in place, then we can shift gears at some point and start to do Vipassana style meditation on the thought stream. But I find that the body is primary for most people. And so anyway, they're just in silence for about 5 minutes. And then I'll check in with them and I'll say, okay, now tell me, how is your level of distress? Would you say you're at the same level as you were when we started? Has it improved at all? Meaning, has the sense of it being a problem, the sense of it being distress, activation, energy, has that kind of gone down at all? And I encourage people to be honest. I tell people, please, don't feel like you have to perform for the meditation. Just tell me how you're actually feeling. And occasionally, some people will say, I feel just as distressed at the start. That does happen sometimes. In which case, we'll just add on another 5 minutes. And I find inevitably, most people, it's 5 minutes. For some people, it can be as long as 10 minutes. But after some period of time, it is inevitable that if you just stay with the feelings in your nervous system, just noticing them, the sense of them being a problem and the sense of their peak intensity will diminish. There will be some kind of sense of a passage of energy like a wave that will have a peak and that will dissipate and will start to diffuse and settle down. And this is an amazing experience for people, sometimes for the very first time, just to notice this, right? Because when you've been trapped in cycles of avoidance for years and years and years, again, not anybody's fault, this is just a transmission, it's just conditioning. You might have never had the opportunity ever, as a human to actually experience anger coming in, or sadness, or loneliness, or frustration, whatever it is, like a wave, and just stay with it. Just keep your hand on that hot stove and just notice, oh my God, I don't have to do anything about it. I don't have to solve it. I don't have to fix it. It doesn't have to be managed. If all I do is just actually connect with it, it will actually get its needs met. And again, to bring in this analogy of the inner child healing, which isn't really an analogy. I think it's actually quite literal. And I see this with psychedelic work in particular. When people are working with 5-MeO-DMT, there is an actual literal regression to childhood, or people can talk as if they were children. They can suck their thumb as if they were children. There is this processing of these very, very deep inner childhood energies, right? But we are just noticing that, and this is quite true. I mean, as a parent, I can say, when my kid comes to me and she's very, very distressed, if I try to, in some ways, pressure her to not feel that, the feeling will linger, right? There's that old saying, I think from Carl Jung, that what we resist persists, right? But if I actually just say, oh, I'm so sorry, can I give you a hug, or do you want to talk about it? It's amazing how quickly the feeling will shift. Sometimes it's just a matter of minutes. And then it feels like it just comes through like a spring rain, and it's on its way. To me, that watching that in her is just really, really illustrative to me of just how dynamic our human emotions are, and our natural capacity we have just to allow emotions to welcome them in and to process them and spontaneously have them release when they are just given the space, the mindful curiosity, and the compassion to just notice them. And so, so this is a big light bulb I find for many of my clients when they experience this meditation, is just to realize, oh, wow, I don't have to do anything. I have this natural capacity. I've had it ever since I was a child. It was just stymied and it was not cultivated. But I have this capacity as a human to just feel my feelings and just watch them move through me and auto release spontaneously. It's just an amazing thing. So that really is the core of what I want to share. And it is, I think, the most important skill that I, as a therapist, can communicate to my clients and hopefully sending this out to the world. And then there's one more part of the meditation, and this is part 3. And this just starts to open up into non-duality. Now, you may notice here that even though so much of what I do as a therapist and as a meditation teacher and as a psychedelic guide is focused on non-duality, I actually kind of feel like non-duality is sort of the icing on the cake. I feel like the ability to contact your emotions in your body directly in real time and just be with them, I would argue is a more important human skill than tapping into non-duality. That's just me. Wonderfully, those two things can actually come together. So it's not like we have to pick one or the other. But I do want to say, I think that the somatic processing of emotions is primary. And I always start there. Because if we start with non-duality, sometimes that can be an avoidance, right? It's possible to just start to open up into the sense of spaciousness and interconnectedness and actually become disconnected from your body. And I've seen this with clients sometimes. They come into my practice and they say, I've done, hours and hours of meditation. I've been on all these retreats. I've done all these psychedelics. And, at a moment's notice, I can just close my eyes and I can just disappear into the vastness of awareness. But I can't feel grief. I can't feel pain. I can't feel sadness. I can't feel anger. I'm so disconnected. And so we actually have to kind of backtrack and say, well, let's just start with the body, right? So that's why I always think that's the root. But non-duality is also a beautiful other way of experiencing being and your emotions and your sensations. And I also love to invite people into that space as well. And so part 3 of the meditation is just a little sprinkling of non-duality. I don't get really deep into it with folks like initially. We do more of that work later, but it gives everything more space. And here's what I mean by that. So when you are working in this vipassana kind of way with body sensations of emotion, or you can do this with chronic pain as well, or even, as I mentioned, with the thought stream, there is this way that all of that at a certain point in time starts to feel a bit tight and a bit constricted. And I sometimes use this metaphor of a bunch of butterflies that are in a jar. I think it occurred to me, I think Michael Taft has a similar metaphor of like hornets in a jar. I don't know if I came up with that separately or he came up with that I don't know. But anyway, butterflies in a jar, what I mean by that is when you invite this feeling like the hot stove, sometimes it can actually feel like your stomach is, you're having butterflies in your stomach, right? So and it almost like a literal sensation, like a fluttery, a flighty sensation, right? And so we might, be inclined to try to manage the feelings initially, but when we just stay with the feelings, just noticing, just doing the vipassana, just connecting with the feelings in the stomach, the butterflies will kind of settle down, right? But they're still in a jar, and butterflies don't want to be in a jar, right? Butterflies want to be free into the sky. They want to be released. And so that's where non-duality comes in, because what you realize is that this boundary of the body and also this sense of noticing in this kind of dualistic sense what's happening in your stomach from the a kind of locus of awareness that feels like it's behind your eyes, that's actually very tight. It's very constricted. It's very constructed. It's very fabricated. It's very kind of heavy. And it doesn't have to be like that. It is just a kind of construction that can be dissolved, can be softened, can be opened up. And then there's this wide meadow and this spacious kind of sky of experience that we can work with. And so what I do with people usually is after they tell me, okay, yes, I'm noticing there has been a significant drop-off in the level of distress. I always wait for that first because we have to make sure that the feeling has gotten its needs met. The feeling is no longer in kind of peak intensity. Then I start inviting them into some non-dual exercises, non-dual openings. And anybody who's familiar with non-duality will know that there are a million ways, you could say almost infinite ways to tap into that experience, I think of these almost as like a kind of yogic stretch for the mind, for consciousness, like self, you could say, for your experience of awareness. When awareness is tight and it's divided into subject object, into all these dualities, it feels like a great yawning and releasing opening just to have the mind open and to experience this porosity and this interconnectedness and flow of all these different energies and all these different sensations. What I find with clients, and this is oriented towards people who are starting out, um, what I find is most helpful is to just do two things initially. I have them with their eyes closed, just to look through their closed eyelids. And what you might find when you look through your closed eyelids is that there's no sense of near and far or corners or edges. There's just this kind of soft expanse. They call this the Ganzfeld, if I remember correctly, in sort of sensory perception studies. And within that's just soft field, there can be this sense of expansion that starts to open up. It's kind of similar to looking up at the night sky or even the sky during the daytime, the blue sky, the clouds, cloud gazing, looking out at the ocean horizon. When we are in natural environments where our eyes are just kind of open up in this way, it can induce this feeling of openness. It gets us outside the boundaries of our usual kind of tunnel vision where we're just focusing on whatever we're interested that's right in front of us or just, that person, that object. It's kind of like we're seeing, and we're relaxing into this wide open, spacious visual field. And that simple intervention can really, really relax people and can really start to open the aperture of their mind and getting them a taste of non-duality. And then what I also invite them into is working with the sense of sound. Of course, as I said, there are many ways we could do this. These are just two that I find that are very simple for people. And with sound, what we do is I say, now listen to sounds that are close by, like your breath or the sound of my voice, and then listen to sounds that are farther away. Maybe there's traffic or a bird call or a fan or something. And then try to listen out a little farther, as if there's music in the distance that you're straining to hear, to see if you can hear it. And then just asking them, can you notice that you can't hear where your hearing ends? It sounds kind of simple, but it's true that your hearing, as you kind of extend out your sense of perception, it doesn't hit some wall, thunk, oh, that's where I can't hear anymore. Your consciousness in any sense gate only contains what it contains. It only knows what it knows, and it doesn't know what it doesn't know. And so it can't perceive a boundary between the two things, if that makes sense. You can't perceive the fence, right? And so there is a sense, and you tap into that, just noticing, oh, I can't hear where I can't hear. So it can feel, I'm not saying this is literally what's happening, but it can feel as if you're hearing out into infinity, or it can feel as if suddenly your sense perception in the auditory field is boundless, right? It's just open. And then I have people kind of weave these things together. So with their eyes closed, looking through their closed eyelids, that sense of a deep gaze into infinity or into boundlessness, and then hearing out into the soundscape, into boundlessness. There's often this, people tell me they feel relaxed, they feel open, and it feels familiar to people. People say, oh yes, I remember feeling this way when I was a child at the seashore. Or I remember feeling this way when I go into the forest. This is how I feel when I'm in nature. And it's beautiful for them to recognize, and wow, I don't have to be in nature to feel this way, even though it's wonderful to hike to the top of a mountain and have this wide sweeping vista. This is just something that is within me. This is a human capacity, kind of like we said earlier, the capacity to just process emotions in the body. This is the capacity to just tap into awareness. So we're just unlocking these just innate capacities we have as humans that are just so expansive and so beautiful. And so I have them just rest in this openness for a little bit. And then the final twist of the meditation, I guess you could say this is like part 3B, is I say, now let's just briefly bring back the hot stove, right? Earlier they had sort of turned it on, but then once we shifted into the body sensations, I don't have them kind of actively cling to it or actively recharge it, unless it's just really, really quickly dropping off. Sometimes we'll try to bring it back. But usually it's like we just turn it on initially, and then in a sense we kind of turn the stove off and they're just staying with the body sensations, just watching the dissipation of the body sensations. But now we're kind of briefly turning it back on at the end. and noticing how, okay, maybe some of the same body sensations are arising. Okay, right? It's like the butterflies are coming back, or they're noticing they're a little agitated again. But we now have this access to this greater, wider working space within which to process and bear witness to these emotions or these sensations. So if they are still feeling something like a fluttery sensation in the stomach, like butterflies, or some kind of tension in the throat or whatever it is, I have my clients visualize that sensation expanding, quite literally, just growing bigger. Can you imagine it getting bigger than your body, bigger than the room, and larger and larger and larger, in a sense, allowing it to expand out into this context, this spaciousness of non-dual awareness. And I'm always clear to tell them, and remember, this isn't about getting rid of it or fixing it or solving it or sending it away. We're not trying to get rid of it. Actually, we are inviting it in to have its fullest, biggest expression, which again is counterintuitive. It's as counterintuitive as holding your hand on the hot stove. Right? Why would you want to make something bigger? If it's distressing, you should try to get rid of it and push it away. You should try to make it smaller. But actually, we want to experience the heat of the stove and also allow it to expand, invite it in. And it just so happens that when we give it its biggest expression, it tends to get less dense, right? So the butterflies tend to fly away in the sky. Or as I said, as Michael Taft says, the hornets, aren't as, dense, right? They're not as much of a problem when you release hornets into a big field, big space. So yeah, so this is the essence of the hot stove meditation. So just to kind of recap, part one, we turn on the hot stove. So we invite in something distressing. And again, this could be something emotional. It could be a thought. We could work with thoughts. We could work with body sensations that are already there, like chronic pain, for example. But usually what I'm trying to do with people is to welcome in, for the most part, body sensations associated with distressing emotions. That's part one. Part two is we pivot into just mindfully noticing, just staying with them with this curious, detailed vipassana kind of style. That's also this compassionate inner child healing. Staying with that long enough, at least 5 minutes, but sometimes it takes longer, to watch a noticeable drop off in the level of distress. At least like a 50% drop off. And then once you're there, just starting to open, getting beyond the container of the head and the container of the skin, the map of the body, the sense of the locus of attention being behind the eyes and all those different kind of constructions and machinery of mindfulness and stuff like that. Just letting all that fall away and just opening the aperture of your mind into this sky-like mind, this spaciousness, and noticing, there's so much room here for all of these sensations to expand. And as I mentioned, you can welcome them back in if you feel like they've, almost completely dissipated. And then noticing that now you have a different vantage, a different context, more spaciousness for them to arise and to release. Okay. So this is the hot stove meditation. This is something that I do with all of my clients at some point in their process with me. And I do feel like this is the heart of what I do. As a therapist, as a psychedelic guide, as a clinician, I like to tell people, essentially, I'm just going to try to teach you two skills. One is the skill of contacting emotions in your body, and the other is the skill of contacting non-dual awareness. And I think these two things dovetail together really beautifully. And they're just amazing skills for life that are deeply transformative and certainly for navigating psychedelic experiences. And if I really could just share one thing with the whole world, it would probably just be the first one, just the skill of contacting emotions in your body, because it's not anybody's fault, but so many of us are just trapped endlessly, perhaps our entire lives, in these cycles of avoidance. Again, we can call that protection, of just trying to escape pain, just trying to block out the trauma and the pain through addiction, with really, chaotic kind of relationship dynamics, with all sorts of just bad habits that don't serve us. And all that's really needed is to reprogram our consciousness, our nervous system, to learn how to stay, to put our hand on the hot stove, stay with the feelings and notice and know that these emotions are not going to destroy us. They're not dangerous. They're not something that has to be fixed. It is a part of our human experience. It is a beautiful kind of music, a kind of sensory experience for us to tap into. And that's what I'd really like to share. So I hope this has been helpful for you. And yeah, if you're interested to do this in a more experiential way, obviously you can try this out on your own. But I'd love to help you out. So if you want to work with me, of course, feel free to visit my website where you can learn more about what I do, and you can schedule a session with me, and we can figure out what would be most helpful for you in terms of whether it may be psychedelic work or maybe coaching work. And if you would really like to connect with other like-minded people in a community who are interested in this sort of stuff, I've now set this up on Patreon. I'm pretty excited about this. This is kind of a new project for me of creating a community on Patreon. So there's various levels on there where you get access to different kind of community opportunities. The first one is a signal group. So at the lowest level, you get access to a group of people who are all interested in this sort of stuff. And so you have kind of instant community to chat and to share and to kind of gather wisdom together. And I'm part of it as well. So it's another way to kind of access me and get my 2 cents on things. So yeah, that's all I have to say for today. Thank you so much for listening.